All right, everybody, let's get started. I'll throw my announcement slide up for today. I think the word of the day is bird, because it's quite chilly today. And so I'll again apologize in advance, I guess for the remainder of the semester for the added walk and moving the class over to this building. But I think probably has become evident, it's a lot roomier. We've got a lot more room to spread out, and this will definitely matter when we start doing exams, when we do plan reading exercises and just in-class exercises. It'll make that a much more pleasant experience. So again, I apologize for the walk, especially on days like today, but there is a method to the madness. Speaking of, because we have an added walk, I'll just say that I'm going to be a little more gentle and whatnot in case some of you have class at 10:50 and then have to hike all the way over here. I know you might come in a couple of minutes late, and I get that. So I'm going to be a little bit more gentle on the, like if you're a couple minutes late. I'll also mention that if folks come in a few minutes late, and I'll say this a few times today, but I'm going to bring like a hard copy of the QR code. So if you come in a couple minutes late and it's off the screen, go ahead and scan it. Now if you're, like 20 minutes late and whatnot, that's a little different. But if you're a couple minutes late, I'm not gonna hold that against you given the added walk. Okay. Just real quick, assignment 1 was due. How did that work? Was that pretty straightforward? Everybody, was that pretty smooth? Okay, good. As I mentioned during the first lecture, my goal is to get everybody onto a homework schedule where we assign something on Wednesday, have it due the following Monday. We would have done that, last week, but with the holiday and whatnot, we pushed the homework deadline to Wednesday. So I am giving you assignment 2 today. It's going to open today at 1 p.m. and it's going to close on Monday at 10 a.m. This is the last homework that will close at 10 a.m. The remainder of the homeworks will close at 5 p.m. So the idea for the remainder of the homeworks past this one is that because those homeworks are going to require AutoCAD submissions, the idea is that I wanted to give you a little bit of extra time in case you wanted to come into class on Monday and go, hey, we had some problems with the homework, we can chat about it in class. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So assignment 2 is going to be the same format as the last one, sort of a multiple choice quiz. Going to open at 1 p.m., close at 10 a.m. Sound good? Okay, any questions on logistics and housekeeping? All right, so let's get to it. All right, so today's lecture is going to focus on AutoCAD. That's what we're here to do. So I want to say a few words about it, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And for those of you that that came in a couple minutes late, I'll get your QR code. I'll mention this at the end of class, and I'll get your attendance and whatnot. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about AutoCAD. So a couple things I'll say about it. AutoCAD is pretty much one of the most, had anybody heard of AutoCAD before taking this class in this period? So a few of you have, okay. AutoCAD is probably one of the most ubiquitous software programs in the field of engineering. And ubiquitous is just a big old fancy word for just saying it's everywhere, okay. I would say just about any engineering office setting is going to use AutoCAD or some sort of similar drafting package to produce engineering drawings or engineering schematics. Some offices might use a slightly different program or whatnot, but they're going to use something very similar to AutoCAD. I'll say this, AutoCAD's primary purpose is to generate drawings and schematics, but it can also be used during the design phase and conceptual phase. So the idea is AutoCAD is a really good place to troubleshoot and make sure that everything fits together properly before you start manufacturing it. You can also do geometric computations, like draw a shape, figure out what its area is, lengths are, so on and so forth. So it can be used on the computational side of things as well. But it's a very, very useful program to have in your skill set. What we're going to do today is we're going to open up AutoCAD. We're going to learn a little bit about the interface, about the basic features. We're going to execute some very, very basic commands, things like drawing lines, erasing those lines. I also want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with using the interface, using your mouse. How many of you have a mouse with a wheel with you today? That's what I like to see. Okay, so if you have not yet gotten one, again, a mouse with a physical wheel helps. And just to make the point, I have this Surface touch mouse, and it can scroll, but it actually doesn't have a wheel, so panning with this mouse is a little difficult for me. So I'm breaking my own rule a little bit. We're going to learn how to set up a drawing, and we're going to learn about customizing some input features like object snap, grid snap, things like that. Okay. So I'll say a few things here, and then I'll pull up AutoCAD. So by the way, today I'm going to be hopping back and forth between the PowerPoint and AutoCAD itself, so I'll try and minimize that. So I'm going to say a few things while you all have opened AutoCAD. So when you open AutoCAD, you should have this sort of like landing opening screen where what you can do is create a new file, or you can see a list of all the files you've worked on before. So if you've never opened AutoCAD before and you open it right now, I think there's like 3 files that shows up that have some sample like structural drawings or mechanical drawings or assembly drawings. Those are just like the standard samples that come in the AutoCAD installation. But as you work throughout the semester, you'll see all the files that you work on and whatnot through the semester. So why don't you go ahead and create a new file right now. Just open it and click New. You shouldn't really, on Windows, you shouldn't really need to specify a specific type in that drop-down menu, but if you want, just make sure that you select the one that says AutoCAD.dwt. That's just sort of the standard template. For you all that are coming in late, just come on in and sit down, no worries. I'll say a few notes at the end again on attendance, so don't worry about that, but just come on in, settle in, and get AutoCAD pulled up. For you on Mac, just make sure if you need to specify a file, just specify AutoCAD.dwt. That's sort of the standard template to get everything started. I want to say a couple things about saving AutoCAD files, and this isn't really mentioned on the slide, but I've taught this class before, and I'll tell you one of the tricky things is, I mean, it doesn't sound tricky, but sometimes it happens, is that you do have to save. And that seems like a really obvious thing to note, but these days a lot of the programs that we use have autosave features where you don't need to really think about it. For example, if you create Microsoft Office documents on your OneDrive, you don't have to actually click the save button. It's like Google Docs. You don't have to save anything. It just automatically does it. AutoCAD doesn't work that way. You have to actually save. Okay? So if you're on an exam and I give you this big old drawing to do and you do it and you don't click the save button and you upload it, it's going to be empty. You know, and I don't want that to happen. So please do remember to click the save button. Okay? Save often during your work. I cannot stress that enough. Okay? Now, a little thing about the file structure in AutoCAD. So whenever you save a drawing, the drawing is what's called a DWG file. I know we're really inventive in the world of engineering, so DWG stands for drawing. But whenever you save a drawing, if you open the folder on your computer where the drawing is, you'll see something like this. So this is drawing 07008, and then there's an associated paired file with that says 07008.back. Okay? AutoCAD automatically creates what's called a backup file. Okay? Now the way that backup files work in AutoCAD is the AutoCAD backup is one save state prior to the drawing file. So the way I like to explain it is, let's say you create a drawing file that contains a single rectangle in the drawing, and then you save it. And then you draw another line and save it again. The drawing file will contain the rectangle and the line. The backup file will contain only the rectangle, because that was one save state prior. Okay? And I have had to actually use backup files, you know, in a professional setting, particularly when I was sharing drawings with other engineers and other office settings, and there was a lot of external references. Sometimes the backup file, it's just easier to use that. And how do you use it? You literally rename the file, and you just change the letters BAK to DWG, and Windows will automatically, or Mac, will automatically convert it to a drawing file. So it's really easy to use. I just wanted to explain what that was. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what backup files are. Let me say a couple words about the interface. So if you're on Windows, or if you're operating AutoCAD via Cameo, AutoCAD is going to look like this. So the bulk of the commands are going to appear on the top of the screen. Okay? There's going to be sort of like a ribbon of commands, sort of like Word or Excel, where there's like a tab with a series of commands. So we're going to use that quite a bit. There's a command bar down at the bottom. You'll see a bunch of layout tabs and whatnot there on the bottom and whatnot. This is what the Windows interface looks like. The Mac interface looks like this. So there's not a ribbon up top. Instead, there's a bunch of commands on the left and a bunch of commands there on the right. And the stuff on the right is sort of related to layers and properties. The stuff on the left is really where all of your object creation commands and whatnot. So if you're operating via Mac, it should look something like this. Although you might have a dark theme on your screen and whatnot, it should kind of look like this. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let me say a few things about the interface that's common. Doesn't matter if you're operating Windows and Mac. The first thing I want to note is the command line. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you should see this sort of rectangular bar where you can, it should say something like type a command. Does everybody see that? So we're going to use that a lot this semester, okay? The way that AutoCAD works is that you execute commands to create a drawing. So what you'll do is you'll say, I want to draw a line. So you execute the line command, and you start drawing the line. You shouldn't, now the way that it works is you click the command bar, type the command, and press enter. You actually shouldn't need to do that. Like if you literally just start typing right now, AutoCAD should recognize that you're trying to execute a command. So for example, if you type the word line, you should see line pop up and you should see it recognize, oh, we're trying to draw a line here, okay? We're going to do that here in a bit, but I just wanted to sort of make the point on that. Okay, does everybody see on the bottom this like model tab, and then there's this like layout 1, layout 2, does everybody see that? Okay, so we're going to mess with that probably a little bit later in the semester if we have time. But those are referring to what are called model space and paper space. So to give you kind of an idea, model space is where we're going to do the bulk of our work when using AutoCAD. So in model space, we're going to create the schematics, create the drawings for the given features. Paper space is a place where you can create printouts, okay? Now, I want to be crystal clear, you do not have to use paper space, and when we first start learning how to print, we're not going to. We're just going to print directly from model space. The idea behind like when you would use paper space is that if you have a bunch of stuff in model space, so you have like one drawing, and then from that one drawing file, you want to generate a bunch of sheets, right? So you would have a sheet, layout 1, layout 2, layout 3. So a single drawing from which you're printing multiple sheets. That's where paper space really comes into play. So we're not going to mess with that in the early part, but we might look at that a little bit later. For now, just make sure that whenever you're drawing, you're in model space, okay? You'll know when you're in paper space. It'll look different, and if you're in paper space, you're doing something wrong until I tell you otherwise. All right, so let's talk about the drawing options and the customizing the interface. We're going to mess with this a little bit later today, but this is the stuff on the bottom right, and Windows and Mac should see the same thing. So this is the stuff where it says like model, and then it has these buttons and a lot of several features and whatnot. We're going to sort of dissect what each of those mean, or what some of those mean a little bit today, but everybody should see that. Some of this stuff, and understanding how these interface customization options work can save you a lot of time. For example, if you're trying to create a drawing at 1/4 of an inch increments, you can turn on grid snap at 1/4 of an inch increments, and now AutoCAD will automatically snap to that. You'll kind of see what that works like today. Okay, the cursor. Okay, so the cursor should look like this if you start highlighting it around. So it should be kind of a plus sign with a square in the middle. That cursor actually it changes its appearance kind of slightly when you're in the middle of executing a command, so it's sort of a visual cue that you're doing something. And that might seem kind of silly, but when you're in the middle of drawing, sometimes you're just in the zone and you don't know whether you're in a command or just navigating. But one of the things I want to do is I want to customize my interface a little bit, and I want to show coordinates. Okay, so let me show you how that works. Okay, so let's pull up AutoCAD here. So let me open up a new drawing. Okay, so here's my drawing. Actually, let me put me on the standard color scheme. Give me 1 second. Make it a little easier for everybody to see. Okay, so if you look here at the very bottom, there should be this little 3 lines. I've heard the computer programmers refer to that as a hamburger button because it looks like a hamburger. But if you click that, there should be an option at the very top that says coordinates. I want you to make sure that that's checked. Okay? Now, if you've done that correctly, what you should see at the bottom now is this sort of readout. See that thing at the bottom that has like X, Y, and Z coordinates? And then as you move the cursor, see that? You can see the coordinates change. Does everybody see what I'm talking about? Here at the very bottom, we're talking about right here. This part right there. You can see the coordinates and whatnot pop up. I want to have you have that turned on throughout drawing. Trust me, when we start getting in the middle of creating our drawing, that's going to make life a little bit easier. You folks over here, I'm talking about this window right here. You're seeing that and did that correctly. So it's just one little thing that we can do to customize our interface. Sound good? Okay. All right. Okay. So let's talk about the command. So the ribbon that's on the very top contains the command that we use to create objects in AutoCAD, like lines and circles and arcs and dimensions and all this stuff. And on Macs, these commands are collected on the left. For Windows, the Home tab, the very first tab, contains the vast majority of everything that you would need to create a drawing. Doesn't contain everything, so like we'll need to do some annotations and we'll use that tab. But for the Home tab, it should contain mostly everything. For you folks using Mac, the stuff on the left contains the stuff in the Home tab. Macs are organized a little differently, and they actually are able to pack a lot more commands in a much smaller area. But we'll use the Home tab, the Annotate tab. Those are probably going to be the two we use the most frequently. Okay. For you Mac folks, you really don't need to worry about this because this stuff already shows up. But if you look at the top left, there should be some icons for some basic commands. So you can see like new, open, save, save as, and all that. One of the things that I want you all to do is if you click the little drop-down arrow that's next to the share button, so you can see this little icon that looks like a paper airplane, and then next to that there's this little drop-down arrow. If you click that, you should be able to, right here, where it says Show Menu Bar, click that, and then you can see the menu bar up top. I think that's like, I really like having that visual because if there's any command that's not in the ribbon, chances are it's in the menu bar. So if we click that, now we can see like File, Edit, and all that stuff. And again, for you Macs, you don't really need to do that because if you just hover to the top, you can see that it's there. Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay. All right. So we're getting to the good stuff here soon. I just want to make sure we're comfortable with the basics first. Okay. So let's get into some commands. I want to make sure I throw some terminology out at you. We're going to be very terminology heavy in terms of like I'm going to say, like when I say objects in AutoCAD, it's going to have a very specific meaning. And I'm going to try and maintain that terminology throughout the semester. So if I get into definition land, that's why. Throughout this semester and throughout this lecture, I'm going to reference something called an object in AutoCAD. And the best way that I can describe objects are any feature in a drawing that can be plotted. Okay? And by that I mean lines, circles, polylines, hatches, dimensions, text, annotation, all of that stuff. Okay? I say that the term can be does not mean must be. There are plenty of objects that we create in AutoCAD that we have no intention whatsoever to print. A good example of that is a construction line and whatnot. So, and we will, the other thing we'll be able to do is create objects that we can turn on and off with what are called layers. And we'll talk about layers here in a couple weeks. But for now, if you need a definition for objects, that's what objects are. Okay. Now, the way that AutoCAD works is we generally have two modes of operation. We have what's called the navigation mode and then the command mode. Right now, everybody in here is in navigation mode, I think, where navigation mode, you're just sort of looking at the drawing, nothing's really running, but you can just see what's going on. Whenever you execute a command, you'll know because you'll be typing out the command, the cursor will look a little differently, and then the idea is that you can start creating stuff. So the idea is you'll execute a command, do a bunch of stuff, and then get out of that command to go back to navigation. So you're either in navigation mode or you're in command mode. If you're ever in command mode and you need to get out, press the escape key. The escape key is going to be your best friend this semester. You can hit the escape key 150,000 times and you're never going to break AutoCAD. Okay? So if you're ever in the middle of a command and you need to terminate it, hit the escape key. Okay? Now the first command that we are going to use is what's called the line command. Okay? Now, if you just, I want to be clear right now, and we'll talk about this later. There is a difference between what's called a line and what's called a polyline. Okay? Now, we can do this a couple of different ways. We can actually click the line button, or we can type out the command. I'm going to tell you something right now. I'm going to be pretty, my preference is to type it out. Okay? Whenever, I've worked in a professional setting doing this stuff, and I found that drafters that are more efficient and can do things faster tend to just type the commands out as opposed to clicking them. So you can just L and press enter and you can start drawing lines, whereas having to click the button, it does actually save time. And you might think I'm talking about, like a fraction of a second. Well, if you're working on a professional job, that stuff adds up. Okay, so let's open up AutoCAD. So here's AutoCAD, here's my interface, okay, and I'm going to draw a line, okay? So the way or a series of lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type the letter L, press enter, and you can see that the cursor changed, and you can see, like, you can tell you're in command mode because now the command bar at the bottom is asking you for some information. Now we're not going to specify any numerical data today. We're just going to, play around with it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the mouse, and I'm just going to click a point. So specify first point, click right there. And now you can see AutoCAD wants to start drawing a line. And then as you can see, as I click, it's drawing lines. And so we can, get kind of silly with it, okay? One of the things you'll notice as you're drawing is there are a couple instances, you're probably seeing this, where AutoCAD's trying to help you along a little bit. Like, for example, you can see right here, here I am drawing a line, and then look right here. Watch what happens as I try and draw a vertical. It goes, whoop, wait, you want to draw a vertical line. And it's sort of helping you along. That's a polar snap feature, and so there are certain times where AutoCAD is trying to help you out. And so I didn't want that to concern you. But we're just going to draw a few lines, and then when we're done, you can hit the escape button to close out, or you can, if you look at the bottom of the command bar, the bottom of the command bar says you can type the letter C or type close and press enter. Any of those will work. So I'm just going to hit escape, and boom, there's my line. So the first thing I want to do before we move on is I want to make sure that everybody in here was able to do that. Is there anybody in here that was not able to draw some lines? Excellent. Okay, that's what I want to hear. Okay. Okay, so again, we will discuss the difference between lines and polylines later. The short answer is that I drew, about 20 lines. AutoCAD thinks of those as 20 objects. A polyline, AutoCAD would think of that as one object. So, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. So, a couple things that you'll notice when you're drawing lines. So as you draw, there should be some dynamic input that displays. So things like the angles should display or the distances should display. AutoCAD is again trying to help you out. One thing I didn't mention is that you might find your cursor attracted to certain geometric features you've already drawn. Let me sort of do that here in AutoCAD. So, for example, if I'm drawing a line, you can see like right here, if I get my cursor close to here, you can see this little square pop up, and you can see it's trying to connect to the endpoint of a line that I've already created. That's called an object snap. Okay, I'll talk about that here a little bit later. That's entirely normal, and those are features that we can change in terms of how AutoCAD operates. Okay? Everybody good? Okay. And again, when you're drawing a bunch of lines, you can type the letter U in the command line and press enter to undo one of the lines that you've drawn. So if you drew 6 lines and you're like, oh, line number 6 is wrong, just type U and press enter, and it'll get rid of that 6th line, and then you can redraw it. Sound good? All right, let's talk about using the mouse. Okay, the mouse really does make your life a lot easier. Some of you are already playing around with it, and that's totally fine, okay? So I want to say a little bit about what the different buttons of your mouse can do. So let's talk about the left button. The left button can be used to select objects. So you can single click an object to select it. You can single click away from an object to generate a window. Or you can press and hold for a lasso. I'll show you what I mean there. So, like for example, I can click an object to select it. I can drag a window, and some of you are probably wondering why the window is either green or blue. And then I can also click and hold and get this sort of lasso thing. I'll talk about that later. But that's what the left button is for. Okay? The right button is for, you know, the right button is pretty self-explanatory. It's like if you want to right-click and it brings down a menu with additional options and whatnot. That's what the right button is for. But what about the mouse wheel? The mouse wheel will allow you to zoom in and out. And the way that it works is it will zoom in and out, and then the center of that zoom, the way that AutoCAD is zooming in and out, is a function of where your cursor is. Okay? So, like for example, like here's my drawing. See, if I place my cursor like right here in the middle, and I zoom in, you can see that's where it's zooming, right? But if I place my cursor like all the way over here and zoom, it's zooming over there. Does that make sense? So where the cursor is affects where the zoom is. In terms of like actually clicking at the mouse wheel, like using the mouse wheel as if it was a third mouse button, if you click and hold, it does what's called panning. So if you click and hold, it's sort of like dragging the drawing around. This is not actually moving the objects, it's just sort of moving where you are. So the difference between panning and moving is panning is sort of like what I'm doing. Like let's say here's the table. Panning is just like me moving over here. It doesn't actually change where the position of the table is. I'm just moving over here. Moving is actually picking up the table and moving it. Okay? So that's the difference. And then if you double click the mouse wheel, like double click, like you would double click something, what it does is it brings every one of your objects that you've drawn into a single view. So if you double click it, whoop, and you can see everything that you've drawn all at once. It's an easy way of not losing something in that space, because your model space is infinite. You could go on forever in any direction. Okay. As I said, if you drag a box and whatnot, if you see this box that you're dragging, you've noticed that it can go either green or blue. Okay. So I tend to use this quite a bit when selecting, but in order to explain the green and blue, the blue is what's called a window crossing, or a window selection, and then the green is what's called a crossing selection. So the way that it works is if you're dragging a window and the window's blue, and it could work if either it's a lasso or a window, it doesn't matter. But if it's blue, the entire object has to be located inside that window for it to be selected. Whereas if it's green, the window just has to touch that object. So just to show you what I'm talking about, if I go to AutoCAD, so here's a bunch of objects. If I click, so this is a green window, right? Notice this first diagonal line right here. Let's look at this first diagonal line. The moment that the box touches it, it selects it, okay? But if the box was blue, notice how it's not selecting anything. Because the only way blue works is if it encompasses the entire object. Does that make sense? So when I draw a box like this, notice how the only thing it's going to select are those two lines up there because they're totally contained in the box. It's not drawing, or it's not selecting that third one because that third one's not totally contained. Does that make sense? So green will select anything that it touches. Blue will select anything that's fully contained in the window. And the same thing works with the lasso. I'll be honest, I really don't use the lasso very much. Lasso features weren't an option back in AutoCAD 2005, and that's like when I started using it. So I don't know, maybe I'm old school in that way, but yeah, I just don't really use it that much. Okay, let's talk about object properties. So if you look at the very top of the home screen, you should see a properties window. For you folks that are using Macs, the properties window is already visible there on the right. But if you select an object and then type the word prop and press enter, or you click the little properties drop down bar, this little button right here, the little drop down little diagonal arrow. What it's going to do is it's going to bring up a box that looks something like this. And then what that does is that tells you all of the associated properties for that given object. Okay? One of the things you're going to notice is that some of those properties you could actually change numerically. Like you could pick an object and actually change what its X, Y, and Z coordinate is, for one point. But some of those objects are changeable, some of them are not. And the ones that are not are grayed out. It's like a good example of a property that's grayed out. By the way, when it's grayed out, that means it's dependent upon other properties. So a good example of that is a line's length. Okay? You can't really change a line's length directly, because how would you compute the length of a line? Like, let's go back to algebra. Like, if I gave you coordinate A and coordinate B, how do you compute the length of that line segment? Break out the old Pythagorean theorem, right? Okay? So you can't really change the length of the line, but what you can do is change this coordinate or that coordinate, and that will then affect the length of the line. Does that make sense? So some property, if they're grayed out, that means that those properties are dependent upon other characteristics that you can edit. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that over there? Good. Okay. All right. So the erase command. If the align command is the most common command that we use, and I'd say erase is the second most common. So you can click the erase command. However, the easiest way to erase objects is to just select them and hit delete. Okay? So what I'm going to do is go into AutoCAD. Let's just select a few of them. Select these. Hit delete. Okay? Really easy to do. Okay? We'll be doing that this semester, so I just want to make sure we're all really comfortable with just that really, really basic stuff. Okay? And again, as I mentioned, you could click the erase button. So like one way that you can erase objects is you can click the erase button, select the object, press enter, and then it will erase them. But it's just so much faster to select them and press the delete key on your keyboard. It is just so much faster. And I have found that the vast majority of professional drafters, folks that do this for a living, use the keyboard more often than not. So much so that if you literally go to Autodesk website, you can download this. So this is the Windows one. This is the Mac one. I'm going to use the Windows one, although most of these commands are the same. There are so many common commands that you can literally just type one letter and press enter, and it will draft it. So for example, if you want to draft a circle, C, enter. If you want to draft a line, L, enter. Okay? H for hatch, things like P for, I think P for pan, O for offset. Some of these I don't use very often, but line, circle, arc, I use those all the time. Okay? These are the Windows ones. These are the Mac ones. Most of the ones that are really, really common are the same in Windows and Mac. There are some very, very slight differences, but the vast majority of the keyboard commands are the same for both of them. And a lot of the tutorials that I'm going to be generating this semester are sort of heavy on that because, again, they're just faster. I want you to be able to get these assignments done so you can move on to your calculus and chemistry and physics and all that fun stuff. So, okay. Any questions? I've been rattling on a bit. I want to make sure everybody's following with me so far. This should be a pretty easy day, but I want to make sure everybody's good. Any questions? Okay. All right. Let's talk about setting up a drawing, because we just sort of went into the drawing and just sort of went to town. But typically what we'll do before we even start creating objects in AutoCAD is we'll set the drawing up. Okay. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll set up some units. Okay. So we'll go into AutoCAD and we will create units. Okay. So let's do units and press enter. And so if you do that, what it'll do is it'll bring up a dialog box where what you can do is specify the unit system that you're going to be using. Now, the default unit system in AutoCAD is what is called decimal units, which, to be honest, just means no units. It's just AutoCAD just thinks that, okay, you drew a line that is 4 units long. It's just 4 long. It doesn't assign 4 meters or 4 feet or something like that. Now you can go in and change that. You could go in and say, I want these to be in architectural units or engineering or something like that. What I tend to tell first-time drafters is that if you need something to be like in feet and inches, maybe the architectural unit system makes more sense. Otherwise, I'd probably leave it in decimal and just adopt a consistent unit system. That's probably what I would do. The one thing that I should mention is the precision. So AutoCAD adopts a standard 4 decimal precision, so any of the objects you can guarantee precision up to 4 decimal points. For the vast majority of engineering schematics, that's probably fine. You can change that if you want, and I'll say that if we need to change that, I'll tell you. Otherwise, that 4-point decimal precision is probably just fine, okay? All right, you could also, here's another thing you could do. You could also change the angle unit. So right now it's doing decimal degrees. You could have the angle specified in degrees, minutes, seconds. For those of you who decide, or you civil engineers who are going to take CE 241 next semester, you'll know what I mean. How land surveys are referenced in degrees, minutes, seconds. You could specify things in radians if you want. That'd be fine too. Okay. So far so good? Okay. Okay, the drawing area, okay? Now, right now, we've just been drawing things sort of wherever we want, okay? What I want to do is create, or actually define a drawing area, and this can be used to define the limits for the drawing, which I will totally admit won't really matter a whole lot now, but the drawing limits can be a very useful tool for plotting. So the idea is that, so here's an example, we'll do this here in a second, but what we'll do is set drawing limits from the point 0, 0 to the point 11, 8.5, and we'll say those are the drawing limits, and then we can tell AutoCAD to plot everything within that box on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, can you draw objects outside those limits? Yes, you can. Right? There's nothing that says you can't draw anything outside those limits. Setting the drawing area, setting the limits for the drawing is primarily a feature that you would use for plotting. Okay. Now let me show you how you would do that. Is you would just go here. You would just say let's go ahead and execute the command. So we'll say limits. And then it says specify the lower left corner. And so if you notice, so here's something I'll mention about AutoCAD command structure. So if you look at the very bottom, it says specify lower left corner or, but then does everybody see inside the bracket? See where it says 0, 0? So that was the value that that was the default value that AutoCAD had already used. So I'm going to go ahead and say 0, 0. And then I'm going to go down here in the command bar and say 11, 8.5. Okay. Another reason I wanted you to execute that command is I just wanted you to get used to typing out the values as opposed to what we did with the lines, which is just, let's just draw a bunch of lines. In later exercises, we're going to need to specify coordinates, lengths, dimensions, and so on and so forth. And so we need to get used to doing that. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. Okay. Let's talk about the drawing settings and the grid settings. Okay. And this is, I think, when you're first starting to use CAD, this is a really, really powerful way of making sure that AutoCAD is doing what you want it to do. So what I mean by that is, if you want to draw a line that's exactly 2 units long, if you don't have your snap settings done correctly, sometimes that unit is not 2 units long, it's 2.001 units long. Take that stuff and add it up over a big drawing job that you're working on, and suddenly everything doesn't fit together and it's driving you nuts. Okay? Setting your grid snap is a way of counteracting that. Let me show you how that works. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete here. Let's delete all this, and let's go into our snap settings. So what I'm doing, hold on, I did that a little fast. I'm clicking this right here, this drop down area right here, and I'm going into snap settings right there. Okay, and what did I have here? This is why I printed out my slides so I didn't have to keep going back and forth. What do I want to do here? Let's turn our snap on, and if you notice, I think, how many of you, your default says a half inch or a half unit on either direction? So everybody says, let's change that to a 1/4 inch. Let's do 0.25 on either direction. Okay? And then the other thing that I will do is I'm going to, on the right side, see where it says display dotted grid? I'm going to check the box that says 2D model space, and I'm going to hit OK. Okay, does everybody see what changed? How many of you got the dots that showed up all over the place? Everybody see that? Anybody not see the dots? Okay, good. Now watch what happens when you draw a line. Let's draw a line. Now notice, let me zoom in a little bit. See what's happening? Does anybody see it with your cursor? See how your cursor's jumping around and it won't click anywhere between those spots? Does everybody see that? See how it's like if I let me, I don't know, maybe it's kind of hard to see. Does everybody see how it's sort of attracted to those grid points in between? So what we did is we said it will only allow AutoCAD to draw lines in 0.25 increments. So it's a really powerful way of making sure that the lines are the length they're supposed to be. Okay, make sense? Okay, and then you can click. Just click the little button here to turn it off, or you can go back to the window and say, let's turn that off, turn that off. And boom, there we go. So, pretty straightforward. I'll turn my drawing grid back on. There we go. Okay. So again, we'll use a grid snap for our first couple of assignments in here to make sure everything is going the way we want it to. First, good. All right, I do want to talk about object snap. Okay, so object snap is let me draw a few lines to go back to that. So draw a few lines. Okay, now when I draw another line, let's draw this right here. Object snap is when it's trying to snap to a given feature inside AutoCAD. And AutoCAD has a very accepted legend for what those snaps are. So notice how right now what AutoCAD's trying to do is it's trying to draw a line and it's trying to attract to the endpoint. Everybody notice the symbol? It's a square. Everybody see that? So whenever you see that highlighted square, that corresponds to an endpoint. Okay? Now, here's something else. Let's do this. Let's draw right here. Okay? So right here, see how it's a square for an endpoint? Right there, does everybody see how it's like a triangle? That's for the midpoint. Okay? AutoCAD, again, it has a very accepted schematic for what those object snaps are. Now, what you can do is, let me hit escape. Okay, so if you look right here, and I'm going to keep that up on the screen. So if you look right here, you can notice that I've got a few objects selected that I want AutoCAD to snap to. Okay, now the more objects that you select, the more AutoCAD will be attracted to, which can be good and bad. Okay, the good side is that it'll find all the features that you're looking for. The downside is that if you have a really, really dense drawing with a lot of objects, it can actually get a bit unwieldy. So usually, like in my practice, like what I do, and again, this is your preference. You can do this however you want. I tend to use like endpoints, midpoints, centers, and intersections. Extensions sometimes, but really I don't use a lot of the others unless I'm doing something very specific. But for example, just to sort of show you how this works, let me draw a circle. So here's a circle. Okay, if I draw a line, you can see there's the center. Okay, But there's one feature that I can snap to called a quadrant. And so if I click the quadrant, now you can see that's sort of the north, south, west, east of the circle and whatnot. And again, AutoCAD's using this sort of 4-point diamond sort of as a quadrant. Again, you can mess with that and play with that as much as you want. Okay? Everybody okay with this? Okay. All right. Trying to think if there's anything else that I had here in my slides. I'm not sure that I did. Oh, no, I did. Yeah. Okay. So, grid snap, I already talked about this, but this was where we could change the grid units and display that in the model space. Let's see. Oh, I know what I wanted to show you with that. So if we go back to the drawing grid, let me go back to this. This is what I want to show you. So we'll turn on that 2D model space grid, but if you notice right here, see where it says display grid beyond limits? Okay, you see that? So I went back to the grid settings, and I'm saying, okay, let's display the grid beyond limits. Let's uncheck that. What you can see, so if I check that, hit OK, now it's only displaying the grid. See how it's only displaying the grid in the very bottom? That might be kind of tough for you to see with the lighting and whatnot. It'd probably be easier to see on your screen, but maybe what I'll do is turn these off real quick. That didn't help. What's that? You can see it? Okay. You can probably definitely see it on your screen better than whatnot there, but you should see that the drawing grid is only displaying in this little rectangle there on the bottom. And where is it showing? Where we defined the limits earlier. So just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. The last thing I'll show you, and then we'll call it for the day, is this these options down here for orthogonal mode and polar tracking. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see this image that sort of looks like a right angle. If you turn that on and then start drawing lines, you'll notice that it will only draw lines up, down, left, right. Okay? So, for example, right now, draw a bunch of lines. Turn on orthogonal mode with this right angle, and it will only draw up, down, left, right. It will not allow me to draw a angled line. Okay? And so this could just be another way of exercising control over the schematics that you create. I threw a lot of interface stuff at you today, but the idea is that I just wanted you to get comfortable with the interface so that when we start learning how to create objects, we sort of understand this stuff. Okay, a couple housekeeping items before I close. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So now that everybody's here, I just want to say two things. I'll let you go. Okay. So for today, I'm not counting anybody late because it was your first time finding the new room. What I'm going to do in the future, so eyes up here, what I'm going to do in the future, I'm going to carry this with me. I'm going to have a physical copy of the QR code. So you know how I put the QR code on the slide. If you are a minute or two late and the QR code is gone off the slide, I'll have a physical copy with me. Come on up here. Don't be shy. Just come on up here, scan it. And go sit down and get ready. Now, if you're 20 minutes late, that might be a little different. But I'm going to be a little bit more gentle and whatnot on being late, especially if you've got a lab that goes to 10:50 and then you've got to come over here. But just try and get here as soon as you can. Try and get your laptops fired up, AutoCAD ready to go, and we should be squared away. Sound good? You got a quiz that opens at 1 p.m. today, closes at 10 a.m. Monday. I'm going to pull the code up one more time. That's all I got, everybody. I will see you all on Monday. Try and stay warm.